So I have read the story of Oedipus, and it was a very interesting story. Um, so Oedipus was born to the king and queen, and when he was born, a prophet came and told the king and the queen that Oedipus would grow up to kill the king and marry the queen. The king was disturbed by this information, so he took Oedipus and um, put him on a mountainside in hopes that he would die. Well, Oedipus was discovered and adopted by um, the king and queen of Corinth. So he was born to one royal family and adopted by another royal family. As Oedipus was growing up, he had heard the story of the prophecy, but he had thought that it was would be due to the family that he lived with, so he left. But when he left, he ran into um, a stranger, and they got into a fight, and Oedipus ended up killing him. Well, this stranger was his biological father, and he was the king of where Oedipus was from originally. So the townspeople were happy that the king was killed, and they granted Oedipus king of the throne. They made him king. So Oedipus was he ended up marrying the queen, and they had 4 children, and they were happy. Well, then the town um, the plague had hit the town. So the only way to get rid of that was to find out who killed the king. So Oedipus started investigating and trying to figure out who killed the king. And well, after he heard the stories, he realized that those stories sounded very familiar, and that he thought he was the one that killed the king. So he kept on trying to get to the bottom of it. And his wife, it was all sounding too familiar, the whole prophecy situation. So she was like, "Look, Oedipus, let's forget about it, let it go, chill out, let's just move on with our lives. This plague can't be too bad. Everybody's just kind of whining or whatever." So Oedipus couldn't let it go. So he kept on until he figured out that he was the one who killed the king. And he realized that this story, well, he had originally heard the story growing up, and he thought it was with the parents that he had that were adopted him. Then he realized that this whole story was the prophecy of this family. So Oedipus' wife ends up hanging herself. She couldn't live with the fact that she was married to her son, and so Oedipus he couldn't live with the fact that he was married to his mom, so he ended up gouging his eyes out with her brooch. So here he is, he's middle-aged and has 4 children, living with the fact that he's married to his mom, and he leaves. Now he's blind. So he's living this life of guilt and heartbroken, and finally somewhere he finds it in him to forgive himself. So he forgives himself, and he dies a peaceful death. And all of his kids end up dying as well. The first 2 end up killing each other over the throne, and the girl killed herself, and then the youngest son was killed. So my assignment was to tell what I liked about the story or and why. Well, I thought the story was sad, and I feel kind of odd saying that I like the story, being the background of the story is of incest. If I were to say that I like something about the story, it would be that Oedipus and his mom they did have a guilty conscience and they were not okay with the situation. I just feel like they were really hard on their self for how they handled it. Um, if they had known that they were related, I think it would be a different story. But since they didn't know and it was all innocent, I just think that it was just a bad deal. And I guess what I have to say about that is this happens. This is happening more and more every day. For instance, my children, their dad's adopted, so they have no idea who their biological family is. They could meet them at Walmart and have no idea that that's who they are. Although we live in across the country from one another, so that's likely not going to happen. But it's not impossible. So, you know, people who come from adopted families, this situation could happen, and it does happen more and more and more. And so when you do find out, well, I couldn't even imagine how I would feel, but I do hear the stories, and I think that it would be hard to live with knowing that you were married to your brother, your sister, your cousin, or whatever, but I just don't think it's just sad. It's just a sad situation, and I kind of feel bad about saying that I like the story, but it was very interesting, to say the least.